on literature, language, and social justice. I'm Nuria Godon, Associate Professor of Spanish, and today, along with my colleague, Dr. Alejandra Aguilar, we are the co-organizers of this series of talks that bring prominent scholars in the field of Hispanic studies. These scholars are working on the role of literature and language in the pursuit of social justice from an international perspective. Today, we have the honor to count with Dr. Mercedes Lopez Rodriguez from the University of South Carolina, who will talk about whiteness and other racial fictions in Colombia. We would like to thank the Department of Languages, Linguistics, and Comparative Literature that hosts these conversations and recognize the support of the Dorothy Smith College of Arts and Letters, the Hispanic Honor Society, Sigma Delta Pi, and our staff, Camela Ibrahim, Jackie Caraza, and Polly Barks for helping us with the promotion of this event. I leave you now with Dr. Alejandra Aguilar, who will introduce our guest speaker. So enjoy the talk.
Thank you, Nora and Nuria. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third and last conversation of our fall semester. Thank you all for being here today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alejandra Aguilar. I am an assistant professor of the Department of Language, Linguistics, and Comparative Literature here at Florida Atlantic University. I am so pleased to have the opportunity to introduce today's guest speaker, Dr. Mercedes Lopez Rodriguez, who is going to discuss with us whiteness and other racial fiction in Colombia, how literature creates racial imaginaries and sense of privilege. I want to remind you all that after Dr. Lopez Rodriguez's presentation, we will open the floor for questions, comments, and you can also write in the chat if you want some questions during the presentation. Well, Dr. Mercedes Lopez Rodriguez is an associate professor of colonial Spanish American literature at the Department of Language, Literatures, and Cultures at the University of South Carolina. Her scholarly research lies in the intersection of literary studies, ethnography, history, and art history. Her research focuses stem from a long interest in the representation of difference and the emergence of new cultural practice with context of conflict in Latin America, particularly in the Andean region. She's the author of two books, Blancura y otras ficciones raciales en los Andes colombianos del siglo XIX, that was published by Iberoamericana in 1919, last year. And I'm gonna have the link in the chat if you are interested to buy. The book is available right now in Amazon. Also, she is the author of Tiempos para rezar y Tiempos para trabajar. And I'm happy to announce that this book is available to download in the internet, that you are going to find the information in the chat. Dr. Lopez Rodriguez has published extensively in colonial and 19th century Latin American literature and cultures. I just gonna mention two publications that are very for the few years ago. One of the articles is Racial Fictions Constructing Whiteness in 19th Century Colombian Literature, that was published for Cambridge University Press. This is a collection of essays. And another that I want to mention, because it's a lot, La invención de la blancura, la racionalización del espacio andino colombiano a mediados del siglo XIX, and was published in the book Estar en el presente, literatura y nación desde el bicentenario, edited by Enrique Cortés y Gwen Kilpatrick. Dr. Lopez Rodriguez is now working on a new book titled Sensing and Feeling the Other, Hearing, Smelling, Tasting, and Touching Emotion in Colombia from 1850 to 1970. She's also currently working on the lives of Colombian immigrants in South Carolina, exploring the impact of the last 5 decades of internal conflict in the life of those who feel the violence of their country. She served also as the co-chair of the Colombian session of the Latin American Studies Association, or LASA. And this is just a brief selection of her achievements. We are greatly honored to have Dr. Lopez Rodriguez with us today. Please join me welcoming her.
Thank you so much. I really thank you, my friend Alejandra and also Nuria for this invitation. What I plan to do is dividing this presentation in three parts. In the first part, I would like to introduce myself. In the second one, I would like to develop this concept of whiteness and why I believe whiteness is a performance in Latin America. And in the third part, I would love to have a conversation with the audience. And I want to start with an introduction because I really feel that in these Zoom times, we do not know each other, and we don't know why this person is coming here to read this paper with this accent instead of just sending the link. So I think we have to work harder to create a connection before to start a dialogue. So I'm going to start right now introducing myself, although Alejandra did this wonderful presentation that it's much, much better of what I was planning to do here. But anyway, let's do it. When I arrived for the first time in the US to start my PhD many years ago, I mean like many, many years ago, one of the most culturally shocking experiences was answering the question, what is your race? As a person who grew up in Latin America, I knew what my gender was, my nationality, even my social class, but my race. In my country of origin, at least in my generation, asking about someone's race was very impolite and frankly made no sense. After many years living in the US and writing several articles and a book about the topic, I still feel very uncomfortable answering this question. I am a Latina. I am originally from Colombia. I live in the South, but I don't know what my race is. This uneasiness became the core of my research. In social sciences and humanities, the notion that race is a cultural and social construction is widely accepted. Nevertheless, it is easy to believe that our own ideas about racial and cultural difference are universal, that our systems of classification can and should be applied to everyone in the world. Due to the long history of relationship between the United States and Latin America, it is very important to think about the narratives that historically we have created to explain our differences. My research is an attempt to bring attention to the ideas that have shaped our understanding of others. Very often, when these ideas remain unattended, they become realities. Let me give you one example. We all use in everyday life expressions such as a white person or a Latino woman. However, who can be included in these categories has never been a fixed notion. In my country of origin, I am considered as a white person, while probably here in the United States, the way I look, my accent, my cultural origins make me a non-white citizen. This example also gives me the chance to reflect on a point that I believe is crucial in my research. Race and social difference function in a constellation of practices and representations that very often go beyond the physical appearance. It also involves discourses about cultural practices, such as the type of food that a group of people likes, the style of clothes they prefer, the accent they use to speak, their music. All these elements are not intrinsically racial, but they become racialized. It means that we use them in our everyday life narratives to talk about the race of others. These practices are not new inventions of our time. Actually, they have a long history that starts during the colonial past in societies characterized by inequality of power, the exploitation of Native Americans and African descendants, and the subordination of women. This is the reason why my work pays close attention to the past and to the narratives and practices that created our present. My research focuses themes from a long interest in the representation of difference and the emergence of new cultural practices in context of conflict in Latin America, with a specific interest in my native Andean region. My studies lie at the intersection of literary studies, ethnography, history, and art history, combining textual analysis and anthropological methods and theory. This interdisciplinary approach marked my work with an emphasis on the historical depth of racialized representations of Andean peasants in literary and legal text. My latest book, titled Whiteness and Other Racial Fictions in the 19th Century Colombian Andes, explores the literary narratives that created the singular notion of a racially white Colombian Andean region, highlighting a contrast with the rest of South American Andes, where indigenous populations remain at the core of literary and visual representations. It revisits the notion of whiteness in Latin America and the ways in which race acquires materiality in everyday practice, such as the consumption of food and European personal goods, and the politics of fashion and attire. Moreover, it proposes a reading of whiteness as a performance in which bodily traits are combined with non-racial contents such as manners, literacy, and codes of dress to create a desired white body. This process transformed fundamental European notions of whiteness, for example, purity, with the aim of offering a path to whiteness for the racially mixed Latin American populations. It explores how the country grappled with issues of identity and race through the prism of an emerging Colombian literary field that promoted contradictory narratives about mixed race unions. These representations open the literal and symbolic Andean territory to the expansion of a robust ideal white population. Since my first book, Times to Pray and Times to Work, I have been arguing that racial categories have been textually constructed. It means that the production of social difference through text is an essential problem for both Andean and literary studies. By examining the interwoven dynamics of social and cultural life expressed in literature and visual arts, my publications contribute to the ongoing study of cultural difference in Latin America and to the understanding between our two regions. I am now working on a new book titled Sensing and Feeling the Other, Hearing, Smelling, Tasting, and Touching Emotions in Colombia in the 19th Century. Building upon my previous studies, this book links two complementing approaches. On the one hand, it focuses on the analysis of the construction of race through sensorial experiences. On the other, it studies the emotions associated with the five senses, drawing attention to their crucial role in naturalizing discourses of exclusion and discrimination. Racial difference arises in the interaction between sensing and feeling, bound together in Spanish through the use of the same word, sentir, which conveys both meanings. I am also currently working on a new research project that combines my experience in cultural anthropology with my formation in Latin America literary and cultural studies. This new project focuses on the stories of Colombian immigrants living in South Carolina, my state, exploring the impact of the last 5 decades of internal conflict on the lives of those who fled the violence in their country. This project has a strong collaborative nature that has been developed thanks to the participation of graduate students of public history and Spanish at the University of South Carolina. It is also part of a massive effort undertook by the Colombian Commission of Truth and Reconciliation in cooperation with universities and social and cultural organizations all over the world. I strongly believe that this new development in my research agenda brings together my reflections about the historical formation of discourses about race and cultural difference and the current issues of our unsettling times. Thanks to the Department of Languages, Linguistics, and Comparative Literature for this invitation and for giving me the chance to share with you today my research. Hopefully, it will make a significant contribution to this ongoing conversation about justice, history, and memory. And now I want to start to work more closely in the problem ahead of us, whiteness. And I refer to whiteness exactly as that, as a problem. But before focusing our attention on whiteness, I would like to talk about the problem of mestizaje. Probably some of you are familiar with the concept of mestizaje, a particular Latin American racial development. The idea that some nations in Latin America are racially conformed by mixed race population. However, I think of mestizaje as a conceptual trap, especially for the 19th century era. There are no mestizos in Colombia in the 19th century, or at least the documents don't show people who claim themselves to be mestizos. It seems more like the elites are talking about white citizen in progress, and let me explain this. No one is actually categorized as a mestizo. It's categorized as a person who is becoming whiter through different procedures. On one hand, of course, through marriage and alliance to whiter people, something that is famous in Latin America with the expression of mejorar la raza, improve the race, but also through performance, through education, through consumption of European goods, and through involvement in European practices. In that way, it's very hard to find a person who claims themselves to be a mestizo. Most probably, a person will claim to be a white person or not claim to be anything at all. The second concept I would like to develop in this presentation is actually not mine, but it's very important to understand my argument. And it's the idea that in Colombia, race is not, we don't talk about race openly, we talk about race using the word region. It means that we define entire regions by racial categories. The Andean region is a white region. The indigenous population lives in the tropical valleys in the Amazons, and the Black population lives in the coastal areas of the country. That's not true, but that's how the racial imagination divided the country. In that sense, if you are a Black person and you live in the Andes, you are not even considered a member of the Andean society. You are an outsider. And this is a very aggressive way to divide the nation. The second part of this argument is examining whiteness as a performance, as a non-fixed construction. And this is absolutely different from the US construction of whiteness, when you have two poles, white and Black. You are one or the other. In many countries in Latin America, and particularly in Colombia, this is not a bipolar division. It is more a kind of spectrum of positions, of different positions. And I will explain that in a moment. And finally, I want to refer about this concept of whiteness and the involvement of the five senses or the senses other than sight in constructing a notion of race. Let's start by this idea that mestizaje is a conceptual trap. If you see this image that comes from La Comisión Coreográfica, the Colombian Choreographic Commission created in the mid of the 19th century, it represents what it says is tipo blanco y indio mestizo. I roughly translate that into types white and Indian mestizos. To me, it was not easy to understand what exactly were the difference between these three types, white, indigenous, and mestizo. Probably it's easier to understand who is the white in this picture, but can you actually explain what the difference is between a mestizo and an indio? So when I try to conceptualize these differences through the mental notions I had as a person who was born in the 20th century, I found it very difficult. So the first step in my research was leaving behind the concept of mestizaje as I learned it from my experience growing up in Colombia. And that's why I refer as mestizaje as a conceptual trap, because your own ideologies and your own notions of race will be in the path of creating or understanding what is happening in the 19th century. Actually, in the 19th century Colombian, mestizaje and mestizo is a notion highly associated with being illegitimate, and it's not a positive notion at all. And this is very different, for instance, from the state-sponsored discourse that we will see in Mexico in the 20th century. So that is the first step. Forget about everything you know about mestizaje in the 20th century, because the 19th century is going to be totally different. So this is very interesting. Imagine the idea that the race of a person can change in the life of that person. Probably we all here is in this afternoon, we all grew up with the notion of race as a fixed biological construction or something like that. Even if we try to improve ourselves with education and then we learn that race is socially constructed, the truth is that behind us, in the backyard of our knowledge, there are some notions of fixed biological contents. So it's very hard for us to understand the idea of a 19th century community that defines race as something that is not fixed in the life of a person. Race that can be changed through hard work, through discipline, through education, and through morality. And that's what I want to show you in the examples today. As I mentioned before, also the idea that race is not only in your body, but is also a collective construction in your race, in your region, sorry. So these images come also from La Comisión Coreográfica in Colombia, the Colombian Commission, and you will see that people in the Andean region are depicted as white, while people in the regions, more tropical regions, are mainly depicted as indigenous or Afro descendants. So let's think about this. What is actually a white person? As I mentioned several times during this presentation, whiteness is not fixed, and whiteness is not purity. When mostly of the population is actually non-descendant of Europeans, but it's the product of several centuries of racial mix, the elites had to face this problem. What are we going to do with our mixed race populations? So what they decided to do is create a path to whiteness for these populations. They might be not white, but they can become white through education, through discipline, through hygiene, through different practices. It means that the emphasis cannot be on purity. And this is something that is different again in Colombia than in the United States. Purity, it is not as important. You can have mixed ancestors in your personal history and still work hard to become some sort of white person. I'm going to offer two examples of how this whiteness is not fixed coming from literature. The first one is the novel Mercedes, written in 1864 by the Colombian author Soledad Acosta Samper. This is a short story of a woman who is the daughter of a Spanish member of the elite just before the independence of Colombia. She is very proud. She is not a very nice person to have around, I would say. And during the novel, which is a very short novel, you will see how she loses the condition of whiteness. How is that possible? How a person who is white can actually loses the condition of being white? Well, first, because she and her family rejects the independence of the new country, they become less fortunate and they become poor people. Second, she had an accident and part of her face was a little bit deformed, and because of poverty and the inability to survive by their own means, Mercedes ended marrying a mulatto guy. And through all these conditions, at the end of the novel, we will see a woman, Mercedes, who is so different from the beginning that the members of the elite do not recognize her as a white person anymore. It's not immediately that she loses the whiteness, but because whiteness is a continuum of practices involving not only the skin color or the hair color or the eye color, but also the education, the wealth, the wealthiness, the social circle, everything together. It's whiteness. And because she loses most of it, she stops being considered by others, or at least recognized as a white person. I have another example coming from a different novel. This novel is called Bruna la Carbonera. Carbonera, it's the coal seller. This is a story by Eugenio Diaz Castro, circa 1860. And it's the story of a poor white peasant, white, right, poor, but poor, who's pushed to the edge of become insane due to several circumstances happening during the novel. First, the exploitation by richer people who are not morally capable of being the leaders of the nation. Second, the constant civil war that Colombia suffers during the 19th century. against the poverty and the exploitation. And all these conditions make her become insane. And when she becomes insane, people around her stop recognizing her as a white person. In one very salient part of the book, at the end of the book, one of the white ladies saw Bruna running in the countryside, and she says, "Oh my goodness, who is that savage woman? She is not from this region. She must be from the tropical lands." Clearly, in this case, the white lady is saying that this white peasant is not more easy to identify as a white person. So again, poverty and circumstances can make a white person start looking as a white person and becoming something else. That's why, to understand these examples, I developed the concept of whiteness as performance. In this image, we see exactly what 19th century audiences were expecting from a white person. Not only skin color or a type of hair, but also a type of performance. And that performance included consuming European goods, European attires, European codes of dress. Also, and very important, being readers of literature, especially French literature, actually. And this trope is so important that very often in novels, you will see the main characters traveling around the country with trunks full of books. And imagine how useless this was in a geography as a Colombian geography. In one particular novel, Manuela, in the first chapter, we will see the main character, the white guy, Don Demosthenes, traveling to the parish, La Parroquia, with several trunks full of books. And when he needs something to eat, he realizes that there are very few places around in the countryside where he actually can buy food. He never thought about bringing food with him because he was saving the space in the trunks for his books. So it is very important to have books. Hopefully, it was also important to read the books, but we are not sure about that. But it was performing, having a book and showing that I am connected to this metropolitan audiences of readers, and especially of French literature. And the third condition I want to acknowledge here is whites are supposed to be urban dwellers. They are supposed to live in the cities, not in the country. And there is a very long tradition of studying this idea that in Latin America, native populations are associated with the rural environments, while colonizers are associated to the cities. In the 19th century, this idea continues to bring attention to the fact that whites should be urban. So what happened with rural whites? What we are seeing here is a depiction of a rural white. There was a name in Colombia for rural whites, the big-eared people, los orejones. And they were very uncomfortable in some ways. Rural whites were wealthier than urban whites. They had much more money and much more land, but they were not consumers of European goods, at least not in the same rate that the dwellers of Bogota, for instance. So they were featured as backwards in literature and visual production. I want to give this example. Isaac Holton, an American writer and the author of New Granada, 20 Months in the Andes, published in 1858, described Los Orejones, the rich proprietors on the savannah, are not highly respected by the gentry of keener weights and lighter persons who call them orejones or big-eared. But why? I really cannot tell. They describe them as big, burly, brutal, and butcher-like, with a characteristic face recognized everywhere, and which marks the bearer as rich and stupid. But I have great fear of doing them an injustice and an impression that a nearer acquaintance with them would bring out some excellent qualities. So in this testimony, I want to show the difference of perception between an American traveler and the local elites, showing how being rural, despite being white, is something that creates uneasiness among the population. Also, I want to quote Isaac Holton in this beautiful part of his testimony. He's talking about the image that we are seeing in the left of this slide. On the opposite page is exhibited the most successful imitation of European customs that I have ever heard of. That all these 6 figures clad in imported articles exclusively could have ever been met in one day exceeds my belief. With such care has everything national been banished that I am tempted to think that they themselves have been imported to order packed in sawdust. So in conclusion, so we can have a conversation afterwards, I argue that in colonial context, race is performative, but also is sensorial. Race is not only visual, it involves performance. And a performance is not only visual, a performance requires the participation of the smell of the others, the sound of their voices, the sound of their music, the taste of their food, the touching of their skins. It is not only how they look, it's the whole performance. And in a performance with an audience. The white person who is white in a continuum, remember, not as the opposite of another pole, but as a part of a continuum of positions, meaning I am whiter than you, so I am white. And this is very important. That person who is always trying to perform whiteness needs to perform with the 5 senses. Of course, it creates a permanent fear of contamination because there is no separation, because it's a colonial context. It's a colonial context of servants, of other people, other groups around the white person. There is no possibility of segregation. Actually, segregation is not a desirable thing at all, but a constant requirement of separation. It's needed. So if I want to prove that the person is white, I need to show my performance as a white person. Look at my dress, it's European. Look at my books, are French novels. Look at the way I speak, my accent. Look at my shoes, because many of the non-white population actually didn't have shoes. Look at, listen to, smell to, always requiring an audience. And this is very important, always requiring an audience. And what kind of audience? Audience of my peers, other whites, other whites who can say, this food smells really bad. Look at this person without shoes. So what happens when I don't have an audience of white people? I become a writer. I write about my experiences and I publish my experiences in the newspaper or in a novel to create this community of white people who are communicating their experiences and performing their whiteness to each other. Finally, is race a feeling? This is my new project. When I realized that whiteness was not only skin color and hair type, I realized that there were many other things associated with race, especially with whiteness, especially depiction of some sort of moral superiority of the white person over the other groups. What was the core of this moral superiority? Very often, it is the possibility of the white person of controlling his or her emotions, its control over emotions. Very often in literature, we associate characters, in the 19th century, we associate characters with the racial profiles. Let me give you 3 examples. The idea of the sensual mulatto or mulata. The mulata who was very temptress of the white protagonists of the novel, the one who is walking with some sort of flavor that probably the white women wouldn't be able or wouldn't like to perform. Another type of character, the stoic white male who endures everything that happens around him without complaining because he is of that moral and racial constitution. Or very common, the reserved, quiet indigenous man sitting outside of the store looking without saying anything. So are these characters real? Of course they are not. They are racial fictions, but they are racial, but they are also conforming to a racial profile. That racial profile is so important in the creation of racial distinctions. So important. As important, I argue in my book, as the skin color and the type of hair. You will see in the day of mercado, the day when people go to buy goods and exchange goods, you will see people of mixed race fighting each other, arguing each other, beating each other, because they are like that. They have a different racial profile, but there's also a different emotional profile. While white people would be content and will be able to overcome their emotions. So that's why I'm exploring more and more and more feelings and how feelings are represented in literature to try to understand how these ideas of the differences between races became so prevalent and how these discourses about exclusion become naturalized. I think that's my presentation for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mercedes. That was a wonderful presentation. I think we have some question already in the chat, but I'm gonna keep looking if there is more. I don't know if you can see it, Mercedes. I think the first one is from Carolina Alzate. And can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay. I was trying to read the first question that I saw in the chat from Carolina Alzate. Thank you very much for that question. Just, I'm trying to open the chat now. Sorry, because I'm kind of slow. There is a lot of
No.
comment here. I think it was about the word mestizo.
Mhm.
I think the question is,
Okay, here is what I say about mestizo. There are no many instances where a person is saying, I am a mestizo. Actually, if I think, I haven't seen any instance in which a character in literature says, hello, I am a mestizo. Mestizo is a word that I find more often in essays, like in Jose Maria Samper essays about mestizos, or Manuel and Cesar describing the population of the Andes as mestizos, but not a person saying, I am a mestizo. And I think this is because mestizo was of, it didn't have, it was elite, it bear the ilete yemasi of their birth, probably of not being the son of the daughter of a proper marriage, right? What I see people calling themselves Indians in the novels. I am an Indian, or I am a Sambo, or I am a Black person, but not a mestizo. So that's when I became very suspicious of the word mestizo, because one thing is mestizaje and something very different is mestizo. People are talking about mestizaje, but they are talking about mestizos in a different way that we would understand. One example in which is different. Jose Maria Samper talked about two types of white races coming together and becoming mestizos. Like, let me give an example. The Castilian race, having a union with another white race, that would be a mestizo. But for us, that's not a mestizo, right? Because it's the union of two whites. How that could be a mestizo? Because for them, mestizo was any type of union from two different races. And they didn't have the clear concept of white race as we do have in the 20th century and in the 21st century. One Castilian and one Andalus, they are two whites, but they are different type of whites for them. So the union, it's a union of mestizos. That's totally different from our use. A Castilian and un madrileño getting married to an Andalus, that's not an interracial union for us, but that would be an interracial union for some authors in the 19th century. So in that sense, mestizo is not a category that I can use easily to understand racial categories. I'm going to say that it's kind of hard to follow all the questions in the chat.
No, I have another one also from Carolina, and I'm going to read it in Spanish and then I'm going to translate it. En el contexto de Mercedes, ¿hablarías de Florencio Conde como otro ejemplo de estas tensiones? So the question is about, in the context of the novel Mercedes, if you can talk a little bit more about the other novel, Florencio Conde, that is also from Samper, that you was talking about him. And she's also asking about how you connect that with the manuales de urbanidad that also declare as a bad taste something like a complaint or express hunger or feeling like a pain or something like that as a way of control over the population. That is the question.
Yes, I am very interested in those profusion of manuales de urbanidad and books of manners, and how in the 19th century Colombia, especially in the second half of the 19th century, there is a huge profusion of books trying to teach people how to behave. Manuales de vanidad. Why? Why? I was thinking, why? Why is this important? Why this idea of politeness? What is what they need to? What is the anxiety they are answering to? Right? It's not only a moral anxiety, it is a moral anxiety, but it's also a racial anxiety. It's the anxiety that all these big bunches of population who are racially mixed are looking to become white. So the white elite need to protect themselves against them, the advance of this group of racially mixed people, but at the same time, in the concert of the international relations and countries, the elite is very interested in showing that Neogranadinos or Colombians are actually a white nation, right? So it is an ambiguous situation and full of anxiety. They are afraid of their local whites because they are not as white as they would like them to be. But at the same time, when they are in Paris, they are saying, I'm so sorry, we are whites in Latin America. Stop being racist, European friends. We are whites in Latin America. So it's this double discourse. On one hand is the discourse of we are whites, but inside of our country, okay, yes, we are a white country, but you are not as white as I am. So that's why I always talk about whiteness not as a fixed position, but a constellation of positions. And that's why I need other people. If you are not a member from the elite, if you are not Jose Maria Samper, blondie and with blue eyes and rich and everything, but you are more like a intermediate white, you need to perform whiteness. And you need to be around people who are less white than you, that you can single out as I am whiter than them. And I need to perform that to an audience. Sometimes I ask myself why in Colombia in the 21st century, we are so fractured. And I think part of the reason of this fracture is the fact that as an independent society, as a republic, we grow with the necessity of put other people down. I am whiter than you are. I am richer than you are. I am more educated than you are. So I think that's a very traumatic collective experience for a nation.
Thank you, Mercedes. There is another question from Ivana Frisa. I say, thank you for your presentation. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the need for separation, but never segregation? And I think the idea, this is a very nice question to understand what is this kind of conceptual difference between separation and segregation.
Yes, because in a colonial context, the elites, the white elites, need the other people, the non-whites, to work for them. They cannot be separated, totally separated from them. They need to be attended. They need to be taken care from. They need to have this contact. So I have never seen an intention to segregate the country. Although the 19th century Colombia is a mixed country with different races and very strong racial divisions, they need to be together because that's the way they function as a society. What they need is strong classifications. which is kind of complicated. They need strong classifications, but they need to share the same space, if that makes sense. So the idea of segregation is not possible.
Thank you. There is another question from Anthony Abate. How were latifundistas considered in the spectrum of urban and rural white in the Andean Colombia in the 18th and 19th century?
I think that was the huge problem, that many cuadros de costumbres, sketch of manners, actually focus on that problem. The fact that in the 2nd century of the 19th century Colombia, many people in the cities were actually poor people. Many whites in the cities were poor whites, but they had all this performance of not being poor, right? So you will see all this sketch of manners focusing on one character who is actually dying of starvation, but always properly dressed and always going to take the chocolate with the ladies. And he's dying because he's so hungry. But on the other hand, you have this rich, wealthy latifundistas, as you properly use the word, who live in the countryside. But they don't follow these manners. A wonderful novel about that is by Eugenio Diaz, El Rejo de Enlazar, which is a defense of how latifundistas in the savannah are as sophisticated and as elaborated as the counterparts in the city. But that's a huge tension. What is very important and very interesting to me is what the person who's asking the question is actually pointing, is that they are the latifundistas. So in many cases, they send their children to the cities to get educated, but they get educated in the kind of subjects that latifundistas are not interested on, poetry, for instance. So there is this exaggeration in the representation of the educated urban dweller as something very useless, someone very useless who doesn't know how to do the work of the countryside, and who comes back and spend the time reading poetry to the ladies. So that's a conflict. That's actually a conflict. It is not an homogeneous society. It is a very conflicted society. At the end, I think the poverty in the urban cities is something that we need to take into consideration. I'm thinking of Miguel Samper, La Pobreza in Bogota, Poverty in Bogota, that actually shows until which point this rhythm of consumerism by the white elites was actually creating problems for them. In Florencio Conde, for instance, this is something wonderful that Jose Maria Samper realizes. One of the characters is a very white person, super duper white person, but super poor, because he probably has been spending all this money in buying and buying and buying, while the other character, the contrast character, is a black person. It's the son of a former slave and a white woman, but he has the money because he comes from the regions. He has family or a dad who's a miner is the word, yes, person who works in mining. He has the money, but he is mulatto. So he's able to buy the debt of the white guy, and in that way overperform the whiteness of the other person. But this is a literary recreation. How often something like that situation was possible in reality, we don't know. But at least what we see in literature is this tension between super white people in the cities who are really poor, who are really poor, and other emergent groups who come from the rural parts of Colombia with less clear whiteness defined as purity, but with other aspects of whiteness. So what they need to do is become more involved in the city, more involved in the consumption of literature, more involved in performing whiteness.
Yeah, that's a wonderful idea, Mercedes. I would love to know more. We have a question for Rosanna Ambrosini about the word criollo. So you was talking about mestizo. So she asked, what about the word criollo? Would that be also as mestizo? Because not everybody could identify themselves as criollos. Are both terms pejorative terms?
No, I see mestizo more as a pejorative term. That's absolutely, yes, I agree. But criollo, I don't see it as a pejorative term. I work in the second half of the 19th century, and I don't see criollo as often. Probably criollo, I'm not sure, but probably criollo is more often used during the independence period to show a difference between being born in the Americas for opposition to the people who are born in the peninsula. But I am not sure about that. And this is something that I learned the hard way. It's not projecting my ideas into the text, because that's what happened to the word mestizo, that I projected my ideas about mestizaje into the text, and the text was not talking about mestizos, not in the way that I was intended to. So I don't want to say anything about criollos just because I didn't see the use of the word in the text, and I will just project my education as a Colombian little child learning and in the school that a criollo is a white person who is born in the Americas. So I am not sure. Actually, that's what we need to do, go and look for the use of the term in the text of the time.
Mercedes, has been a wonderful conversation. I'm sorry that we are running out of time, but I'm gonna at least to have at least one more question, because I think I didn't read maybe 2 or 3, but it's more than 3 p.m. right now. So I'm gonna finish with this one that is from Laura Gansi. How do you reconcile categorizing your race here in the USA? I am from Barranquilla and I have always identified as Colombian, but do tend to identify as mestizo if I ask for race, because I know I am mixed and I didn't necessarily align with whiteness, especially as it is performed here, yet my skin is light.
Can I copy and paste what she said about her?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. What do I know? I know that the racial classificatory system of the US is different. I know that we do have a racial classificatory system in Colombia, but we obliterate and negates that. And sometimes when I am talking about race in the US with scholars of race in the US, I realize that they don't know about other systems of classification. They make their system universal. Like, this is how race works in the US, so this is how race should work around the world. So I resist that. Very often I resist that. And I said, no, this is how US works. This is not how Latin American works. It's different. Please study that. Read my book.
Yeah.
But sometimes I find myself dealing with that in other ways. Like Ray find the US classificatory system as the real one, and my system, Latin American, as a wrong version of it. I try to avoid that. Mostly what I'm going to say when I say I'm mestiza, I am deleting my indigenous ancestors. So even if I classify myself as mestiza, I am doing a fiction, a racial fiction, right? So the only thing I can do is being aware of racial fictions. But when I have to answer any form, I feel like absolutely descarada. Sorry, I cannot translate that into English. Like, you are asking me for something that is very violent. I found it aggressive. You know what? What you are asking me is a racial fiction. So anything I answer to this form is fiction. I'll do whatever I want. You cannot classify me. So I stand in defiance of classifications because I am too complex.
Well, thank you very much, Mercedes, and thank you all for being here today. I don't know if you, Nuria, do you want to close the event?
Yeah, well, just thanks very much, Dr. Lopez. It was fantastic to hear this wonderful talk that I have enjoyed a lot. And thank you all for being with us this afternoon. And we hope to see you in our next encounter in the spring 2021.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye, you all.
Bye.